I think biggest question of the day, how we lift South Asia out of poverty for the very last session, and exactly an hour to come up with some answers. We've got an excellent panel here. I think I'll just jump into the first question, a very general one. What is the single most effective vector for promoting development in South Asia in your view? Is it investing in human capital? Is it microfinance? Is it empowering women? I think, Roshaneh, I'm going to put this one to you.
Thank you, John. It's a pleasure to be here. And it's my fate, I always get the graveyard sessions for some reason. So you have to do a bit of song and dance here. So asking me this question, obviously you have an answer, which is unless we invest in our women, we are not going to progress. And if you look at the data in the past, that's come out, the IMF took out a report, the World Bank took out a report, just for South Asia, if we remove the gender gap and we reduce gender inequity, we will be able to increase our GDP by almost 51%. And this is a no-brainer, unless or until we invest in our women. And the one indicator that we look at to measure that is, of course, is the labor force participation rate. And across South Asia, we see there's a variation, with Pakistan at the bottom of the pyramid, and Bangladesh at the top with 40%, and Pakistan we've plateaued at 22%. So there's a direct correlation with women's participation in the economy with the outcomes. If we compare Bangladesh to Pakistan, just on a very broad level, our GDP per capita is currently $1,500, and Bangladesh is $2,500.
So this is the single thing that Bangladesh did right that Pakistan did not.
Yeah, I mean, if we look at singular aspects of this, whether it's literacy, whether it's life expectancy of women vis-a-vis men, whether it is the most important thing that we don't talk about, which is the tsunami waiting to hit us, its population. Bangladesh, I've been working, my first visit to Bangladesh was almost 34 years ago. So I've been watching that country and comparing it to what that I do with microfinance here. And I'll quickly talk about that in a minute, but one of the things they did was from reducing the fertility rate of women from 6.2 children to less than 2 now, which is replacement. In Pakistan, we're still at 3.6. So how can you, if you grow at 2%, 2.2%, and your population is growing at 2.4%, real GDP growth is nil. So, I mean, unless until we tackle these issues and we talk about the mindset that holds women back, and we do all the investments that need to go with them, for which I have a list, but I'll stop here, and I will talk about microfinance. So what Bangladesh also did right was the economic. If you give money to women, what happens? It transforms generations.
Right.
I mean, it's a no-brainer again.
And you have experience in Grameen Bank, don't you, where very much Dr. Eunice's program was very much about empowering women.
Absolutely. It didn't start like that, interestingly, John. It started with take money to earn money, and it was a poverty alleviation program. But the women took it over. Because when a woman is seeing the suffering of her children not having enough money to feed them, she's the one who takes it into action. And if you design the program in a women-centered way, right, where you bring the bank to the women. So one of the biggest reasons why women are out of the labor force right now is women.
Right.
So we have to invest in infrastructure. There's a lot of data which shows even in India and other countries where you build roads and women end up accessing healthcare. And that changed the dynamic on fertility. So all of these are interrelated.
Yeah, I see Rhonda nodding. I think you want to intervene here.
Well, since we're on this subject of how necessary it is to empower women to prosper the country and the society, I'd like to just add on women in agriculture. I mean, the agriculture is a huge part of the economy here, and 70% of agricultural workers are women, and they're mostly informal, either unpaid or not very highly paid in the agriculture sector, as I understand the evidence. So that is a huge area. And, I do recall my first mission to Pakistan was a long time ago, I don't have to say how long, but in 1984, Pakistan had a 6th 5-year development plan at that time with a vision that was put together by Mahbub al-Haq, Minister of Planning at the time, who later went on to develop the UNDP Human Development Report. And revitalization of the rural economy was a central part of that plan. And part of it was education and literacy for women and girls as a key angle of that. I mean, it was a wonderful plan. Of course, it was never fully implemented, as most development plans aren't, to be honest. But I do recall that. And continuously women have been a huge force in the agriculture sector.
Absolutely. What about just developing the economy? What about just better economic management? What about running the economies of the region better? Dr. Ijaz, isn't that the answer?
Yeah, thank you, John. I'll just take 30 seconds to pay homage to a friend and a mentor who passed away recently, Khalid Ahmed, who would have been a central player in Lahore, this year's Lahore LLF, had he not passed away. He would have really appreciated this session. He was very interested in regional trade, regional economies, and Pakistan's role in it. Let me turn to your question. Since I'm an economist, I'm going to give you some numbers to keep the perspective right. India has 18% of world population and has 35% of the world's poor people. Pakistan, 3% world population, 6% of the world's poor. By contrast, China has 17% of the world population, very similar to India's, and less than 1% of the world's poor people. So something is not working right in South Asia. In Pakistan's case, of course, for the last 20 years, we've seen huge macro crises, which is the result of economic mismanagement. But there are some underlying issues which have been there for a long time across South Asia.
What are the underlying issues? I have my own answer to this.
If you contrast China's excellent performance on reducing poverty with the South Asian economies, one thing stands out, which is China's share in world trade is 21%, whereas India's is 5% and Pakistan's is 0.3%. Till about the late 1990s, Pakistan was at the highest trade to GDP ratio, and there was a lot of hope that Pakistan would continue in that trajectory. Of course, it would need to address things like, bringing women into the workforce, having more people educated. But there was a general sense that Pakistan was moving in the right direction within the region. That changed in the late 1990s and early 2000s. And Pakistan dug itself into a hole because of macroeconomic mismanagement and hasn't yet come out of it.
So so exactly what does Pakistan need to do to come out of this hole? What are the 2 or 3 things that it would need to do to remedy this?
There is consensus among analysts that the critical problem Pakistan needs to address is its fiscal deficit. The government spends far more than it gets in revenue. And then in order to manage that, it interferes in the way the exchange rate is managed. It interferes in the way the tax structure comes about. There's a lot of reliance on trade taxes, which makes it very expensive for those who want to export to come into the trade business. So there are favorite sectors of the economy, like real estate and retail, which are undertaxed. Pakistan's consumption to GDP ratio is 94%. In other words, 94% of what the economy produces and what the economy imports is consumed.
People buying stuff.
People buying stuff. It's 72% in Bangladesh and 73% in India. That structure needs to change.
It certainly does.
And the government contributes to it by running a large fiscal deficit.
It occurred to me I was at one of the grand parties and one of the Lahore big mansions yesterday, that there's more than enough money in Pakistan. It's a question maybe of the distribution. I'm wondering what this country has gotten wrong in terms of fiscal policy.
Yeah, just an addendum. People keep saying that Pakistan needs foreign exchange. Not true. Pakistan gets $38 billion in remittances every year. It's not the lack of dollars, it's what we do with the dollars that matters. Pakistan's problem is not a private sector problem. It's essentially a government problem. The government needs to manage much better the resources that it has. So let me stop there because...
Okay. So the panel is meant to have a South Asian agreement. So I wanted to ask, which countries in this region are getting it right or relatively right, or who's doing it better perhaps than Pakistan is? You already mentioned Bangladesh. You've got some experience, Razeen, in Sri Lanka, where I gather you spent part of the year. Do you think, I'm not sure it's a poster child of fiscal management, but what about, it seems like the poverty reduction record was quite good until the financial crisis of 22. Is that not right?
I could take what you just said in the last 5 minutes verbatim and apply it to Sri Lanka. So, I mean, if one were to do some sort of pecking order from success to failure in South Asia, let's say over the last decade, I would put both Sri Lanka and Pakistan pretty much in the same basket, closer to the bottom rather than the top. This might sound a little bit arbitrary, but Bangladesh is probably somewhere up there, but with a big question mark. Of course, we know Bangladesh's success in the garments industry, which has been spectacular, but it hasn't diversified beyond garments, which says something about policies and institutions in Bangladesh. That's the big difference between Bangladesh and the East Asian success stories. They used labor-intensive industries as a stepping stone to go higher value added, rather than being stuck, as Bangladesh and Sri Lanka seem to be in garments. But then, of course, we have we have high levels of corruption, authoritarianism, a seeming democratic transition, but a big question mark about the future of development in Bangladesh. India, I think, has a very mixed balance sheet. If you look at the last decade of the BJP-led government, some notable success stories, particularly in infrastructure and digital transformation, which one doesn't see to anywhere near the same extent elsewhere in South Asia. On the other side, rather misguided industrial policy, backsliding into protectionism, and an even more noticeable crony capitalism favoring politically connected leading conglomerates at the expense of competition, in addition to political illiberalism and the Hindutva agenda. Coming to Sri Lanka, I think what was a model colony under the British, relatively speaking, and a country that was predicted for stellar success circa 1950, then had 25 years of civil war. And then, of course, just 2 years ago, a very severe macroeconomic crisis, the biggest economic crisis Sri Lanka saw since the depression of the 1930s. So Sri Lanka would come close to the bottom of the list, and the primary culprit there, as you said about Pakistan, is domestic economic mismanagement. We saw a period from, by the way, Sri Lanka was the pioneer of liberalization and opening up in South Asia.
Yes.
The reforms go back to 1977. India, 14 years later.
This was my point. They had a great sort of leap of, I think, 2 decades or so. It's
about 15 years.
Still a more developed economy. Than
so you had a grand opening of the economy after an experiment in Soviet-style central planning, or India Raj-style central planning, and that delivered the goods, particularly with the emergence of the garments industry. But then the Civil War derailed it, as well as pretty bad macroeconomic mismanagement. what we saw from about 2005, when the Rajapaksa dynasty came to power, was a deliberalization process. So we saw a ratcheting up of protectionism. We saw the state taking a much bigger role in the domestic economy, the crowding out of the private sector. And then, especially after the end of the war, with low interest rates and cheap money globally, a debt spree, not primarily the result of Chinese loans, but primarily the result of borrowing on foreign capital markets. So that combination, triggered very much by the government living well beyond its means and financing it through foreign debt in particular, led to the economic crisis. And now we're digging our way out of it. There is some sort of stability. There is an IMF program. The country's 17th now. But it hangs in the balance. Back to your first question. I mean, as an economist, I would say the necessary but not sufficient condition of poverty alleviation and development is economic growth that's driven by productivity gains. And that remains Sri Lanka's central challenge. The challenge really is to improve very low levels of productivity and create the enabling conditions for sustained growth, which would then deliver the resources for good things like education and healthcare and infrastructure and so on.
So you're paying tribute to that. None of you have spoken that much about human capital, and it seems like that's the key, at least from an Indian perspective, that's the key thing missing in South Asia, right? And the thing that differentiates it from the likes of Vietnam or China is these countries, none of these countries have invested enough in education or healthcare or basic services. Is that right or not?
Yeah. So, I mean, if you add other layers to this, there's the human development conundrum, but then there is talent accountability. And if you look at prospects for countries like Pakistan, we're at the top. In fact, last week the report came out that we're the most vulnerable country in the world when it comes to climate risk, and we saw that in 2022, and we're not, resilience is out of the question, we're not even adapting to it. So you add that, and you add Rhonda's point to it in terms of when you're looking at prospects in countries, you have to also hear it with other lens. So there's the gender equity lens, there's the climate vulnerability lens, there's the food security lens. And in our context, in Pakistan in particular, there's water security. Unless or until, so along with human development, you also have to talk about infrastructure and water management and all these aspects that will then impact on food security. So I think the prospects need to be not just seen in economic terms.
Yeah.
I'm an economist, but I guess I'm no longer an economist, put it like that. So I left that ages ago. I had to relearn a lot of this because of the work that I do. And I think we really need to slice and dice the pie in many different ways. It's not just simply about money. It's also about, and you look at Gini coefficients, you look at inequity in terms of distribution. Women are the ones that have been left behind. Another example of this, what we need to tackle, is the wage gap. For example, I was just reading a study a couple of weeks ago. In South Asia, the urban wage gap is 48% for women, while the rural wage gap is 24%. So in urbanization, we are seeing women are being left behind even more than otherwise. And then you add technology to it. So there's another aspect to it when it comes to women and access to technology. So I think we really need to rephrase what do we mean by prospects. That's what I would emphasize.
You mentioned food security, and in India has, I think, the largest free food program in the world. It's benefiting more than 800 million people, more than the population of the European Union. I think it's every month a 5-kilo bag of either wheat or rice. Is this something other countries should look at? And again, I don't think Pakistan has the agricultural surpluses that India does.
So I think Dr. Nabi would also comment on this. We do have one of the largest income transfer programs called the Benazir Income Support Program. But it's an unconditional cash transfer, which means it goes, it just goes to on the basis of poverty. I personally believe that a conditional cash transfer changes behavior. So we really need to rethink. And it's the same with India also. They're just giving the bags of rice or bags of flour. It's not changing, it's not going to change practices, It's not going to change behaviors, it's not going to change inequity in that sense. So I think we really again need to wear different hats.
Wouldn't it change this to challenge a bit? Wouldn't it change behaviors if I'm from a food insecure family and I've suddenly got enough food
Yeah,
to basically feed my family that I can go out and make other choices to.
It also creates dependency in some ways. So we have to balance both.
Okay. Did you want to say something?
No, I agree completely, and there's an echo of it in Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka has had a more developed welfare state than other countries, not just in South Asia, but elsewhere in Asia, and that goes back to the 1930s, a good 10 to 15 years before independence. It started for all the right reasons, but for unsurprising political reasons over the decades post-independence, these policies got more and more distorted and bigger at the same time to cater to certain vote banks. So what we have are welfare programs in Sri Lanka that involve patronage politics, patron-client relationships, are extremely badly targeted. And those who get the worst deal out of it are those who really need the help. Now, getting out of that to better targeted programs, you mentioned conditional cash transfers, is of course easier said than done, because that gets us back to core politics and core institutions, which are very much part of the problem.
What about digitization? You mentioned that in your earlier remarks, and it's something that the Modi government talks about a lot, and I think with some credibility that they've reduced wastage, reduced corruption, targeted more of the right people by moving everything to digital sphere. And I gather Pakistan is looking at this as well. Wouldn't part of the answer be in putting everything online and having an oversight and visibility of everything? Please.
Social protection is great, and all of South Asia needs it. Sri Lanka, as he said, is a very well-developed social protection system. India has its food programs. We have our Benazir income support program, which works very well. But the answer to poverty is not just social protection. The answer to poverty is jobs. You know, South Asia, I think the trend was set by India. We're all hung up on GDP growth. It's important. But what's important is jobs. When people have transformational jobs, in the sense that you were saying, productivity, growth-led jobs, then wages improve continuously, standards of living improve continuously. That's what happened in East Asia. It happened in East Asia for 30, 40 years. That's what's happening in China. The transformation happens because you create jobs for people which are continuously improving in quality. South Asia has not seen that, and I'm afraid, whereas India has done wonderfully on information technology and exports coming out of that, it's not going to be okay for India to be so poor in manufacturing exports.
Yes, and they're not creating enough jobs.
And India's export performance in manufacturing is awful if you compare it with China. The only South Asian economy that got it right was Bangladesh. It is a labor-intensive export-led growth.
Yes.
And that, you can see it in the Human Development Index that you have in Bangladesh, continuous improvement in that. What Bangladesh needs to do now is to diversify out of ready-made garments and move into other sectors. But India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, since the recent crises, we have not come out of that. Sri Lanka should have, as you said, Sri Lanka started it all, but somehow lost the way. So it's got to be about jobs, and you know, you're in Delhi, you know that Indian economy is not producing enough good jobs.
No, I think it's one of the fastest growing economies in the world, and it's not creating enough jobs.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If I might just add to that, John, India is 80% of regional GDP. So whether we like it or not, in the rest of South Asia, the leading conversations about these very questions take place in India.
Yes.
And the tone is set in India. And I think it is unfortunate that some of the arguments about this very question in India are false arguments. Because you find arguments, even propounded by some well-known economists, that dodge the manufacturing issue.
Yeah.
The argument being that India has lost the race on manufacturing, export-led manufacturing. East Asia, especially China, have won that race. So India's solution to its job problem, which is very real, is to go hell for leather into services and domestic manufacturing. And that's the tone set by the present government. Big promotion of domestic manufacturing and, of course, promotion of export-led services. That combination is simply not going to deliver the jobs for this huge pool of less educated, unskilled or semi-skilled Indians coming into the workforce, particularly in that demographic bulge in the north of India. And India is going to lose as a result. I don't see really any way around export-led manufacturing, for which you need an enabling set of policies, which of course involve the kind of tough decisions on labour market reform, for example, that politicians in India have consistently evaded.
So maybe a painful question. Do we think this region is going backwards in terms of development?
I'd just like to comment, to pick up on one of Razeen's earlier points about the civil war in Sri Lanka, because security has certainly reversed development gains in some cases, and I think Pakistan has, coming out of it now, it's much better, but there was a period of about 15 years of very tough security environment here, which did hinder development. It did constrain and even reversed a lot of development gains. We saw it on gender equality front, but other fronts as well. So I don't think we can discount the importance of stability for the prosperity, for the productivity as well. So there's that angle. But,
and political stability is now a concern in Bangladesh as well, right? The country we've been speaking so long about. Right. Is the region going backwards?
Sorry.
Is South Africa
Okay. Again, a little context. East Asia, regional trade in East Asia is 25% of their total trade. In South Asia, it's 5%. But this is in 23. Since then, it's declined because Pakistan stopped trading with India after India's move in Kashmir. India has been playing to empty crowds in Dubai because India will not send its team to Pakistan. South Asia is caught up in a medieval notion of how the world exists and how we solve our problems. Look, the global trade environment has become very uncertain and very unpredictable. We don't know where the United States will end up. What's happened in the last 1 month, if it continues for the next 6 months, and if Trump again comes back with a similar electoral mandate in the midterm elections, the world is going to see drastic changes, and not for the good.
But specifically,
which makes it even more important for South Asia to start trading with itself.
Right, and I have a question about that as well. But first, you want to do it.
Yeah, I just wanted to intervene on the issue of digitization.
Yes.
So you mentioned India, but the demonetization cost them 330 billion rupees, trillion rupees, sorry, overnight when they did that. So it had both its advantages, but it had huge costs attached to it. So I think in Pakistan, when we talk about digitization, we are talking about a more phased approach, which is we have the digital banks, we have the microfinance banks. So the idea is that we gradually move forward. But even then, I keep coming back to Bangladesh, where everything is still cash-based.
Yes.
If you go there, the BRAC Bank, the BRAC NGO, the Grameen of the world are all based on cash. But financial inclusion indicators are the highest there, as opposed to India after its demonetization, and as opposed to Pakistan. So really, we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater and say things in Bangladesh. Yes, I do understand that the political economy of it is questionable, but if we look at the base of it, it's really, the fundamentals are very strong.
Indeed.
So the prospects, you can't, once you have the genie out of the bottle, as in the genie of women out of the bottle, you're not going to send them back.
Right.
You're not, and so the transformation is really in every community when you go there. And that's what we need to replicate in Pakistan as well, I think. And if you look at microfinance, for example, then we look at our numbers because it's also important to do that. You were talking about job creation. We've worked with 7.7 million female entrepreneurs across Pakistan, and they've created, 20% of them have created jobs. So that's about 1.4 million jobs. And that's what happened in Bangladesh also. It was a bottom-up approach.
Yes.
Maybe we don't have the time to do that, and I do agree that economic development and poverty alleviation have to go hand in hand. But we still cannot work without bringing bottom-up.
So everything is the answer, all of the above.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Razeen, you want to...
Yeah, well, back to the question you asked a little while ago, is the region going backwards? My sense is that in the last few years, let's say the COVID period and after, it's been drifting. But there is the very serious danger that it will go backwards, precisely because of a drastically worsening geopolitical, geoeconomic environment. So let me say a few words about that. It's no coincidence that the optimistic years or decades for South Asia, when there was market policy reform, there was an opening of countries and the region to the world economy, took place in an era where we had relatively benign American leadership. Because of that, we had relatively strong international cooperation, and we had an opening world economy that those things were enabling factors for the reforms that were undertaken domestically. Post-global financial crisis, we had an interregnum of, let's say, a decade to 15 years of what the Economist newspaper calls slowbalization. Things were drifting perhaps in the wrong direction, but the order wasn't wrecked. I think we're at the end of that era, and perhaps January the 20th, 2025 was the date when that era ended.
Indeed.
And we are in a new era of economic nationalism with strong echoes of the 1930s. I don't think we're quite back to the 1930s, but there's the risk that we're heading in that direction. So we have the United States turning into a malign power, at least for a while. As a result of that, we see the breakdown of international cooperation. Let's not forget that China is also a malign power, and a mercantilist one, in a more straightforward sense than the United States has been in the past. And the international order, in terms of political security, military security, and economic potential, is breaking down. Now that will feed all the negative forces that already exist in our national economies. So we might have a mutually reinforcing effect of poisonous international relations, and things going badly wrong. That's the danger.
It's not looking good. And I think the answer is perhaps this region, if it's not going backwards now, there's a risk it will be soon. I had a specific Trump-related thing I wanted to ask about, which is the new US president's shutdown of USAID, which is an extremely large player in your respective fields. Will that on its own make a difference? And maybe even a bigger question, he's discredited the whole idea of bilateral aid, certainly. Is there a risk that the entire enterprise of development and poverty reduction is now maligned itself? And I thought I might ask you that as a former bilateral donor from Canada.
Great. Well, I think I'll pass this question over to Roshaneh as well as a partner in with development agencies. But Yes, of course it's having an impact. It's, you know, there's a lot of speculation of what the impact of that is going to be. It's going to be felt for some time. You know, there's immediate, there's longer, you know, it's going to be felt. You know, some people are saying, well, it means that host country organizations or local organizations have to take on more. Host countries have to take on more. It's, you know, it's kind of what the U.S. is saying to a lot of people on a lot of fronts, that, you know, it's time for you to pay more. We're not going to continue paying for all of it. But it does have an impact, and you know, some countries may step up to the plate, but I think we're seeing more bilateral development countries reducing their aid, actually.
Does the U.S. set an example on this, you think?
I think they've enabled you know, that for other politicians to say, no, we have to worry about our own deficit here. You know, it's time, we've also got to cut back. And foreign aid is a very easy one to cut back, to grab initially, because you don't have quite the domestic support for it politically. So it's a very easy grab.
Indeed.
One needs to step back and look at all of concessionary finance and not just USA to understand where it fits in and where it needs fine-tuning. USAID was very important for Pakistan till about the 70s. The World Bank then stepped in, and the bulk of what would have been considered USAID type initiatives were taken over by the World Bank. They were no longer grants, they were loans. And these loans worked extremely well. Pakistan's 3 decades of very rapid GDP growth, that's what we want to focus on, was extremely impressive. The trend changed after the 1990s. The World Bank would do great infrastructure projects in Pakistan, which created this whole north-south infrastructure, which is actually pretty good. Which enabled Pakistan to become a leading exporter in South Asia. Starting the late 1990s and early 2000s, what I call the Bin Laden effect, the World Bank stepped in and transformed the way it was engaging with Pakistan. It started to lend money for budget support to a government that was unable to handle its fiscal accounts. And if you look at the quality of economic management since this change in the early 2000s, it's been going downhill. And there are 2 major reasons for that. One is that the government gets enough concessionary finance to keep its accounts going, postpone the problem for the next 5 years. And remittances, which are coming largely to low-income households, are not bringing people out on the roads to protest. So Pakistan has been stumbling in this concessionary finance environment. USAID has a much smaller role in Pakistan now than it did in the 1960s. Some of it is very good. But you know, I read that, in the newspapers that Shikarpur would no longer have its clean water supply because USAID has withdrawn. It's shameful that we cannot provide the citizens of Shikarpur clean drinking water without USAID. So some of those things should be shut down to get us to start doing our own work.
Yeah.
So I think one needs to revisit this whole question of concessionary finance. And we shouldn't take anything for granted. For the moment, UK assistance is holding, and UK assistance is doing great work. But you know, UK Reform Party is in the wings. So you don't know what will happen in the United States in the next, in the United Kingdom in the next election. So I think that whole paradigm now needs to be re-examined.
I'm getting very depressed by this discussion. Is there any chance that the sort of Trump, whatever you will, calamity, whatever you want to call it, could be a positive shock to the system for the whole, I don't know, paradigm of how South Asia lifts itself out of poverty, that you will rely more on yourselves? I mean, you spoke also about more regional, intra-regional trade. Isn't South Asia missing a huge trick by not trading with itself?
Well, it's a no-brainer. if you look at the geography, the proximity of neighboring countries, the number of people involved, of course, South Asian countries should be trading more intensively with each other. I think inter-regional trade is about 2% of world trade. As you said, about 5% of Asian trade. 5% of trade is about, 5% of inter-regional trade is about 5% of regional GDP. These are tiny numbers. And the reasons for this are visible to the naked eye. The bother involved getting across borders, the tariff, the non-tariff barriers involved, and of course the fact that the major border in the region is almost closed.
India, Pakistan,
yeah,
which I just crossed off.
But it's not just that. You know, if you try to cross from India to Nepal in that Terai region, you see a backlog of lorries, stretching back days. Similar with India and Bangladesh. Now, there are all sorts of reasons for this. Governments in all the countries involved are to blame. But putting the Indo-Pakistani issue to one side for a moment, because that's a separate can of worms. Back to what I said earlier, India is 80% of regional GDP. You would expect the leading country in the region to take the lead to bring down barriers mutually in the wider region. And India has singularly failed to do this. Without India actually taking the initiative, and also not insisting on symmetry, but doing things unilaterally. And when you do things reciprocally, India actually putting more on the table than others, you're not going to get the region as a whole to shift in the direction of better, bigger inter-regional trade and investment. That's the crucial issue.
More integration with India taking the leading role. I'm mindful we don't have a lot of time left, and I know there's some questions.
John, let me just
we'll just quickly, because I
very
will time
quickly,
for our listeners.
very quickly, when I wore a different hat that the World Bank had, I did work on India as well, and on Indian Punjab. So I was there, our team was there, and I was asked to come in and help through negotiations. And I was sitting with Secretary of Finance of Indian Punjab. It was just one-on-one. And I said, look, Indian Punjab was the fastest growing state in India 10 years ago. It's now the 8th, and the projections are that it will be the 15th. How do we stop that? So he looked me in the eye, and he said, Ijaz, open the border and see how we grow. So I just stop it.
It's worth some applause. So some questions from listeners? I see a lady in the front row.
I entered the hall 10 minutes later, so I don't know whether you have addressed the question of population also. In my opinion, in Pakistan, the biggest reason for poverty is the growth rate of population. The people who can afford to send their children to school, they would believe in family planning. And the poor people, whether they're working or not, they get married at a very young age, and then they start producing kids, and then they are either begging or working, so they are not really quality human beings. And then the stunted growth is also there. So I think for addressing poverty, I'm not an expert like you people. As a common person, I feel population is the real issue. Then secondly, when they send them to schools, the education is not preparing them for life. Then they don't want to do the labor sort of work, and neither they are able to get jobs. It's not like skill-oriented and all that. In many countries, there are community centers where people go and get informal education and learn certain things. And thirdly, in my opinion, it is the mindset that we need to change, which they have, the perfect role for a woman and man, and that for that they need media or something. We have so many channels, they will end up in useless discussions but they will not give any public message which will change the mind. And I think unless we change the mind, no matter whatever rules we make, it will not work. People should know what is beneficial for them. Right now, the poor people think, "Bache, they will go work and they will have 2 hands to earn." And I think our religious leaders are also contributing to it. That needs to be.
Okay. Do you have a question for any of the panelists? That was more of a comment, I think. Yeah? Okay. Yes. Gentleman in the front row.
I just want to say that the chart behind you all says that Bangladesh's population is lesser than Pakistan's. I think it is incorrect. Factually, Bangladesh's population is more than Pakistan's. As long as poverty and trade is concerned, that is debatable. So I leave that to as it is. Thank you.
Since I did the graph, let me explain what it is. It's not absolute population. It's the share in world population.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for the comment. I'd like some questions, please.
Assalamu
Yeah.
My name is
Read the full thing.
Hang on.
No, you haven't.
Yeah, thank you.
My name is and my question is from Madam Roshaneh. Madam, as you know that I've read this statement from Qaeda Azam once that he said that if we do not spend 20% of our GDP on education, then each generation will encounter politicians more corrupt than the last. So we must invest at least 20% in education. So currently in Pakistan, what we are spending on education is less than 2%, and it is further declining. And moreover, the public sector development programs that are undertaken by the government. I read this last time in 2023. Our Finance Minister, Sardar Sahab, he gave more than 90% of those public sector development programs to MNAs from his political party for their pet projects. So how do you see that the actual public is being, or their welfare is being catered to on the policy level from the government side, and how does it impact specifically women in Pakistan?
Thank you. I would like to respond to you. We did talk about the tsunami of population before you came in. And about mindset change, please watch our plays. We make drama serials. The last one we did was on population management called Zar Patton Ka Ban. So do watch our serials on the media. Coming back to your question, absolutely. Without investing in women, without investing in education, we are not going to progress. There are no 2 points about it. Like somebody was saying the other day, leaving women behind is like as if you're boxing with one arm. So until we invest in women. Now the question is what Dr. Ijaz Nabi mentioned. We are not managing our fiscal deficit, we are not managing our fiscal spending, and that is one of the reasons. The first things that happen is you cut back on education and human development. I was speaking to a federal secretary the other day, in fact I think you were at that dinner also, who said that the easiest, on the PSD, the public sector development funds, the easiest investment that can be done is on infrastructure and roads. So what happens is all these plans are made, the ADBs are made every year, but it's the ones on infrastructure that get spent because they're easier to spend that money. So again, it's about will, intent, political, economy, and it's also our ability to manage our fiscal deficits.
Yeah, all of the above, in other words. I see another question right here. Gentleman in blue.
Thank you. So I have a question about the role of local governments, because I see that, just for example, yesterday I met a person from Bhavalpur working in Lahore but working for a startup in Singapore. So his question was, why couldn't his own city, a smaller city, be developed to the extent that it's a tech hub? And similarly, you guys talked about China also. In China, they've revitalized a lot of rural communities through the involvement of the local government. So any comments on that?
Who do you want to address that?
I think anyone in the panel would like to answer.
I think, let me pick up the last part of your question, which is that why haven't we developed the local government institution in a way that it can respond to some of those issues that you raised? Local government has become a football between, unfortunately, the army and political leadership. the perception among the political parties is that army, when we have army rule, local government is strengthened, we have mayors, etc., because they want to bypass political parties. So when we have a political process in place, they tend to keep the local governments very weak. There's a lot of very good discussion going on within political parties. They understand the need to have that depth at the level of the local government. Let's hope that it will transform. But it has suffered enormously because of this perception among elected representatives that level of government is really a creation of the army. That perception needs to change, and they need to develop a sensible approach towards local government. On the population question, I think you're right. The overall numbers are very bleak. However, there's some good news on that front also. Punjab set up a special company, a Section 42 company, an independent company that addressed the family planning needs of the poorest women of childbearing age. They used the BISP mechanism to provide them support to get family planning services from private family planning providers. It was very successful. A good example of bilateral assistance, multilateral assistance, World Bank came and has scaled it up to all over Punjab. And now UK aid is coming, FCDO is coming to scale it up to all over Pakistan. So a Pakistani idea that worked very well in one district is now being scaled to all over the country. Let's hope that we stay the course of this one.
I think there's one question right here, the gentleman in the white polo, striped polo. I was actually pointing at him, but that's okay.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity to ask a question. My question is, as India has become one of the largest arms exporters in this region, how do you see this arms race in the South Asian region, especially when it comes to Pakistan? Can tip the balance in favor of, can tip the balance regarding the poverty elimination program in Pakistan? How can it impact the poverty elimination program, and how it can affect the regional integration and region of our family home?
Who's that addressed to? Who are you asking? Did we understand the question? I didn't entirely. Yeah, can you say it just in one sentence? What's the question?
How can the South Asia impact the poverty elimination program in the region?
So it's the classical guns versus butter question, basically. Obviously, I mean, we talk about the fiscal space. If we put money in military and armaments, we're going to have less to invest in human capital and people. And that's been our loss. That is where we are stuck right now. That's been one of the reasons why we are spiraling down. So absolutely, I agree with what you're saying. The question is yes.
Yeah.
Well, I am Ishtiyaq, working for the Labour and Human Rights. My question to Roshaneh, that since for the last 1 year we have seen that the more than 6,000 industrial units have been closed in Pakistan, due to which the poverty is rising.
Can you get to your question quickly, sir?
Yes. The poverty is there. So how can we stop this, that the industrial units are being shifted to the Dubai, to the other countries, and in the Pakistan, the industrial units have been closed, and due to which the poverty is rising among the labor classes?
So I think the industrial units were shutting down because of the high cost of funds, which was an unusual environment. Cost of funds has gone down, and if you talk to businessmen now, they're saying that they're slightly, all of this will be reviving in this year at least, is what we have. But your question on job creation, I think is the elemental thing, and unless economies grow to create jobs, we are not going to see the change. And that's really a critical question, isn't it?
I think we're going to have to wrap up here. I think this was pretty good as graveyard sessions go. Feel free to approach the panelists with your burning questions. Thank you. Thank you very much.